Well, hello everyone. Kia ora, kutu katoa. I think that's correct, isn't it? I hope so. Otherwise, I'm making a fool of myself. It's been a while since I was, I think 2 years since I was last in New Zealand. I've been there several times, and I think most recently I was working with Auckland University of Technology for a couple of weeks as one of their in-house researchers, and been all over the islands, down to Christchurch, up to Napier, and all the way up to the north of the island, and down to Hamilton, and even Rotorua, actually. So those of you in Rotorua, I've been there before, and I spoke, I think, at Wairiki Institute. Some of you may know that, and Wellington, of course, many times. So New Zealand's quite familiar to me. But here I am, sat in the dark on the evening of Monday, the 6th, I think it is, of June, and you're there on Tuesday morning, the 7th. You're in the sunshine, no doubt. I'm here at 9:30 in the evening with the rain pouring down outside, pitch black out there, and so it's kind of quite contrasting, isn't it? Really, but I've got several connections with New Zealand. One of my connections, of course, is this one here, which is my whānau, my extended family. That's my cousin Linda sat next to me there, and her two daughters, and two of my four third cousins. So I have about 10 cousins that live in Auckland, and so whenever I go over to New Zealand, I usually stay with them, and so it's great to meet up with them every few years when I get across. So I thought I'd talk today about what we call connected pedagogy. What I'm going to be talking about is the idea that as teachers, we can connect through technology now. And I know you're all interested in online learning. You're all interested in discussing the idea of how we can teach children and young people when we're separated from them by a geographical distance. And of course, we also need to consider there's a psychological distance there as well, and probably several other types of distance, which I, as a psychologist, am really interested in. But we'll come to that in a moment. What I want to do is, first of all, show you this context here. And later on, I'm going to give you some little activities to do, perhaps in your groups or on your own if you're separated. Hello to Gisborne. I've never been there, but those of you who are in Gisborne, hopefully you can hear me and see clearly what's happening. Have a look at this. This is what would happen. You might have seen this already, but never mind, bear with me. This is what would happen if you shut down the internet for 1 minute. This was what you'd miss. So you can see that there's 3.5, nearly 4 million search inquiries on Google, 1 million logins on Facebook, 4.5 million videos viewed on YouTube. In fact, there's something like about 70 hours uploaded every minute on YouTube. Most of it's rubbish, but some of it might be good now and again, and teachers often sift through it and find, gold dust now and again. I've got a friend called Mr. Bruff. Some of you may have heard of him. He's an English teacher, and he left the teaching profession to start up his online YouTube business, and he's making his living now by making YouTube videos and selling books based on the videos, all about English language and English literature. So he's doing very well for himself. So you may want to look him up. Mr. Bruff, spelled B-R-U-F-F. He lives just around the corner from me here in Plymouth. So this is where I am in Plymouth, and let me just show you something else here. What we've got down there, 1.4 million swipes on Tinder. That's an interesting one, isn't it? It doesn't say whether they're left or right, but it does tell you that this is the kind of thing that people are using the internet for today. So we're a very connected society. And when we talk about connected pedagogy, what I'm trying to do here is to bring together the two ideas, the idea of teaching and learning. So this quote here is from Wikipedia. It's not a very good quote. It's quite verbose, actually. It's about the theory and practice of learning. Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Carnehank. Is that Carnehank?
Yeah, Krista.
Hello, Krista. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going through the idea of pedagogy and the idea that we can connect through it. So I don't think this is a very good definition, really. It's okay, but there's another one that you can get from see if I can change it. Another one you can get from Oxford Dictionary, the method and practice of teaching. Again, it's the theoretical concept. Again, it's a bit of a boast. Here's my definition for what it's worth: leading people to a place of learning. I want to keep things simple. I like to have simple ideas. I don't like the really complex theories very much. I try and simplify them as much as I can. And this comes from the Greek servant, pedagogue. These were people who would be employed by rich households to take children to a place of learning. They'd lead them there safely. And in fact, that's what I think we try to do today as teachers. We try to lead people to a place of learning which is psychologically safe. And often when we start using technology, we can compound the issues, the complexities that we see happening and unraveling in the classroom. Now, I'm assuming you've all done classroom-based teaching and pedagogy, so you're all familiar with the nuances and the dynamics of classrooms and the issues that we get, the challenges we get. The classroom behaviour, management of behaviour, things like assessment, things like the whole idea of preparing for learning and then delivering that learning and so on. And when we start talking about the connected aspects of that, where we have a distance between us and students, then we start to see some complexities unraveling. And I want to try and unpick some of those with you tonight, or this morning for you, and to see where we go with this, and hopefully get some feedback from you as well, and some discussion going. So let me just simplify it even further. As teachers, we're interested in the theory and the practice. We're interested in not just our beliefs, which is the theory, and how we put them into practice, but we're also interested in that sweet spot in between, that what we call praxis, the idea that the point where theory and practice combine, where they become something powerful. And we go through a lot of processes to develop our beliefs and attitudes through training. Maybe our prior experience and our knowledge come into play here, and that's how we decide to become the teachers we become. Then we reflect on that practice, and maybe we have reflexivity. We should have, because reflexivity is the ability to put that reflection in practice into some kind of action to change things, or to modify, or to advance, or to extend or enhance what we're doing in the classroom. And when we start talking about that in a connected way, then we start to look at, as I say, some more complex issues. So how is connected pedagogy different to traditional pedagogy? That's a big question. And maybe you're starting to think about that already. I'm not going to get you to discuss this just yet, but what I want you to do is get that in the back of your mind. Think about that question. How is connected pedagogy different to traditional pedagogy? And I'm going to go through a few ideas with you here about how that might be different. And I'll start with Vygotsky's theory, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Most teachers know about Vygotsky's theory of social constructivism. And there are three zones, he says. There's what's currently beyond my reach. I can't get there at the moment. Maybe one day I will, but at the moment that's beyond my understanding because I can't quite reach it. And then there's what I can learn on my own. And somewhere between that, I've actually, changed it slightly, but somewhere between that is what we call the zone of proximal development. And that really is where knowledgeable other people come in and they scaffold us. They help us to understand stuff which we can't understand or reach on our own. Now, what I want to propose to you tonight, when we're talking about connected pedagogy, we're talking about the context of the digital world, and where all of us have a lot of connections going on and a lot of mobile technologies and social media and the web and so on, and where we have good access to it. The idea is that actually technology can help to scaffold that. It doesn't necessarily replace the teacher, but it does enhance what the teacher does. And in some cases, it can extend and enrich and take things even farther, what the teacher does. And I'll give you an example of that. We've just seen the World Championships in, was it Japan? Was it recently? And what you see here is a Kenyan athlete. In the last World Championships in 2016, he won the gold medal in the javelin. And the following year, 2015, in the following year, in 2016, at the Olympics, he actually won, in Rio de Janeiro, he won the silver medal. And the unique thing about this man, he's called Julius Yego, you can look him up, Y-E-G-O. His interesting aspect about him is that he had no coach. when he won that gold and that silver medal. He learned all of his techniques solely by watching YouTube videos. He watched videos of champions like Jan Zalesny and Steve Backley and just copied their techniques. So it was all autodidactic, if you like, but behind it there was a knowledgeable other set of people who were being mediated through that technology so that he was able to learn. And I think that's a fabulous example of digital scaffolding, as I call it. And I borrow that from Bruner's work, which derived itself from Vygotsky's work. So the idea that we build almost like a scaffold around young people and children and adults as well when we're teaching them. And then gradually that gets taken down as they become more expert in what they're learning. So there you are. There's some theory for you to start building your ideas upon. And I want to show you this picture now, and I want to ask you, what do you think it is? Has anyone got an idea? You can interrupt me here, and if you like. What's happening there? What about you in Rotorua? Anyone there? Any ideas? No one? Not a single person.
I was going to say a concert.
A concert? It does look a bit like a gig, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Or a political rally.
It's a what?
A political rally?
Yeah,
political rally, yeah. And who's down in the left-hand corner? There's someone said it, I think. It's Barack Obama, yeah. And people don't know where this is, but if you look down below, you'll see a flag there or a scarf, and that gives it away. It's in Germany. It's in Berlin, actually, in front of the Brandenburg Gate. And it was just before Obama was elected, the first black president of the United States. And it was a fabulous time because everyone was anticipating this kind of momentous moment in history. But if you look at the people who are there, can you see what they're all doing? Have a closer look. Can anyone see it?
Yeah, are they clapping? No, they've got their cell phones going.
Looks like they're clapping, yeah, but they're not. I'll show you a close-up. Can you see what they're doing now?
Are they recording?
They're all using cameras. They're all capturing the moment. There's even a guy just above the flag there with a laptop. He's holding a laptop up. He's live streaming the whole thing. You know, that's how amazing people thought this was. But you see, the thing was, the whole of the world's media was there capturing this. Why would they need to do that? The reason they need to do that is because they have a personal device, and they want to connect with people that they care about and show them the moment I was there, and they want to share that with them. And the whole point about connected pedagogy, if you like, is the idea about sharing, the idea about being connected and sharing the experience together, sharing learning together, sharing ideas together, you know, even arguing and disagreeing together, but certainly sharing by connecting. So I want to get that across to you, that's really important as a concept tonight in what we're going to be discussing. And to take that a step farther, here's some students who are taking notes. And you've probably seen this before as well. I've seen this at my own events when I speak. I've seen it with my own students. These students look very similar to the ones I used to teach when I was a couple of years ago when I was training teachers, and the 18-year-olds would come in. They'd all have all their equipment. They'd have their mobile phones and their smartphones and their laptops and their games consoles and so on. And they'd use them constantly throughout the lessons. And they'd be capturing information and taking it away with them, and then doing other stuff with it, you know, repurposing it, remixing it, sharing it, annotating it, curating it. There was a whole load of stuff they were doing with it because they wanted to be connected with the moment, and they wanted to capture that moment and then do other things with it later on. And these are principles of the new kind of connected pedagogy that we're examining tonight. So you can see where we're going with this now. And the whole idea behind this is what Tim O'Reilly calls the architecture of participation. The fact that if we're going to talk about new types of learning, learning 2.0 if you want, then the whole end product of that is that people perform their learning. They use tools, tagging, voting, networking, sharing, collaborating tools, and they use these tools to perform their learning through what we call user-generated content, the idea that they can share things. So all of the first diagram I showed you with that 1-minute internet, most of that was people sharing content that they generated themselves. And that's another key principle of connected pedagogy. In the 21st century, we talk about people sharing or performing their learning. And that's going to come back as well in a moment. It's quite an important principle for us to grasp. Now, just another thing here for you. I just want to show you this quote from one of my books. I wanted to quote it because I thought it was important that you understand that young people in particular identify now. They identify tribally, if you like, through the social media tools that they use, and also through the smartphone that they have in their pocket or their jacket pocket or whatever. And my own daughter, when she was about 19, she's left home now, about 25 and 26. And when she left home, before she left home, she was staying with us, and she had an iPhone that we bought her. And she put it onto the top of the kitchen table, and it fell off and smashed on our stone floor. She was in mourning. She thought it was like somebody had died. You know, she went. You know, she was crying and she was inconsolable. And I said, look, come on, Kate. You know, this is ridiculous. We've got another one coming for you. It's insured. We're going to buy you another phone. She said, you don't understand, Dad. All my friends were in there. You know. And, you know, I didn't understand it, but you know, for her, she was identifying with her tribe through that mobile phone. That mobile phone that smartphone was the mediating tool between her and all her friends. And she'd probably be seeing them the next day, and she'd probably seen them all day in school anyway, or college anyway. But the thing was that for her was her mediating tool. So we identify. We have a digital cultural capital, to use Pierre Bourdieu's term. And that membership of the tribe is really important. So again, that's another guiding principle for us when we talk about connected pedagogy. So here's a question for you, another question. What was the earliest form of distance education? I'll give you a clue. It's been around for a long, long time. Any ideas? Any historians amongst you? Radio?
Post, pen and paper and post.
Pen and paper and post, yeah, but when did that first occur then? Correspondence course, we called it, didn't we?
Printing press, the 14th century.
Well, that's a good guess, but even earlier than that.
Pigeons.
Pigeons could have been a good idea, couldn't it? I'll put you out of your misery. It was the 1st century. This is St. Paul, the apostle. Remember, he was. Those of you who know your Bible story, he was imprisoned in Rome. He was arrested because he was setting up churches against the emperor's wishes, and they imprisoned him. And while he was in prison, he wrote letters. So this is him writing the. I tried to get a photograph of him, but I couldn't because there weren't any cameras in them days, apparently. But there were letter writing, or epistles as we called them in them days. And this was the first correspondence course. Yeah, okay, it was one way because the guy kneeling down there was probably someone like Luke, who would be a courier for him, and he would take the letter once Paul had written it and take it to the church that it was written for, and they'd read it, and that would be their instructions. So in effect, that would have been, I suppose, the first distance education of its time. And correspondence courses really came into their own in 1840 when Sir Isaac Pitman took the ideas of Rowland Hill, the penny post in the UK, and started teaching shorthand to people across the UK at the time using the penny post system. And that became a two-way system where they would do the work and then send it back to him for him to mark it and make sure that they'd learned correctly. So in effect, this idea about teaching across distance has been around for an awful long time, nearly 2,000 years, in fact. So here's the School of the Air from around about 1955, I reckon, where radio was being used in the outback of Australia. And even up to date, it's still around, the School of the Air. It was almost closed down at one point, but they managed to rescue it a few years back and refinance it. And so in Western Australia, you've now got online learning, and this little lad here, he's using a headset to be able to talk to the teacher direct. So online learning has now kind of taken the place, if you like, of distance learning, although we still have correspondence courses around the world, and we still have every other medium. You don't ditch the medium or any of the old media, you just build on top of them. So in effect, we're building on the shoulders of giants. And this is a project I was involved in back in 2001 to 2003. This at the time was the largest distance education project in the world. It was a $95 million project, and they'd already set it up around about the year 2000. And I went in with a team to evaluate it 2 years later to find out what the teachers were doing. In fact, they hardwired every school, 176 school districts, they wired up with broadband technology of the time, and used the first internet connections. It was very new in them days, but they also had full motion video as well. Can you imagine that? And digital satellite as well was kind of being started as well. So this was a really innovative project. It wasn't the first one I was involved in either. I was involved in one way back in '96 in the UK when we wired up all the rural areas for the training of small and medium enterprises, small businesses. So it's been going on for a long time, and we're now at a place where we're quite sophisticated with the technology. This really is a miracle, isn't it, what we're doing now? Can you imagine? I'm how many thousand miles away from you? Is it 12,000 miles away? It would take me more than that. It would take me a long time to get to you. I know, I've done the trip loads of times, and normally it takes me about 32 hours to get from London to Auckland. So this is me sat in my office in my home in Plymouth, talking to you all the way across the world, the other side of the globe. And I won't begin to understand, and neither will you, the complexities of how we connect with each other through this technology. But it bounces off several satellites and goes through several cables and codecs to actually get from me to you and back again. And I think that's truly remarkable. Here's a modern day practice. This is Drummoor Primary up in Scotland, near Glasgow. And they've got a point-to-multipoint video going on here. These children here are doing science experiments, and the teacher is remote from them. She's far enough away that it was easier to actually to do it via a video. And it shows what can be done with a local facilitator. There's a clue for you. We discovered that actually with the Dakota project, what happened was that the teachers, because they were few and far between, and a lot of them were specialists, and because South Dakota was such a wide territory with kind of sparse population, it had less than 1 million people in an area probably the size of the UK square. So the communities were far and few between, and the teachers were even farther and few between. So if you wanted to learn Spanish, for instance, there might be only one teacher in your region. So 7 or 8 schools would get together and connect with that teacher, and the teacher would teach them all at once instead of having to go around from classroom to classroom traveling the countryside. It was safer, and it was cheaper, and it was also eventually more effective, because we discovered that with the content delivery and the expertise, you could do that at a distance, but the behavior management had to be conducted locally. So you had to have teachers present or teaching assistants present locally. And here you see a person here. I'm not sure whether she's a teaching assistant, paraeducator, or whether she's a fully qualified teacher or what, but she's there facilitating locally to make sure that the kids are kept on task and that there's no problems with safety or health and safety or whatever, and there's no behavior management difficulties either. So that gives you a clue, I think, about how modern distance education can be conducted when classrooms are connected. Here's another one, same classroom, just another example for you. I'm going to hopefully leave these slides with Darren or Judy or someone, so that you can access these later on and have a look at these in more detail, because all of the sources are down below for online, where you can get more access to these ideas and these images and the content that goes with them. Also, all the photographs on here that I'm using, with a few exceptions, are Creative Commons, so you can actually use them yourself if you wanted to, by just quoting the source of them. So when we talk about online learning, or we talk about learning, we talk about traditional learning and how it differs from hybrid learning, which is where we start mixing and matching the modes. We talk about blended learning, of which, of course, there are many types. So I'm sure you can think of many. It's not just face-to-face versus distance. It's also synchronous versus asynchronous, or group versus solo, or there's so many different combinations that you could think of. That blended learning is now means a lot more than it used to mean. And of course, online learning, which is simply where you, I suppose, where you're studying totally exclusively at a distance because of the geographical nature of your separation from the teacher. And I've listed 7 advantages here, which I've got from another website, which I can elaborate on later on for you if you wish. But have a look at those and see what you think. It's not for everyone. Distance learning, online learning is not for every child, but it does suit some children quite well, particularly those who are able to focus well and who have families that can support them. And maybe they have siblings or they have other peers within the small group as well as they're learning. But I like those ideas, and all of those are elaborated on at that website there. And I just wanted to mention what I said earlier on, standing on the shoulders of giants. You might have heard this guy. Heard of this guy? He's called Nick Negroponte. He was one of the academics. He's a professor of educational technology, and he actually set up MIT Media Lab, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Media Lab. If you know about Wired magazine, you'll know that he was one of the founders of that as well. He's done a lot in his time. And I spent the evening with him once, and we talked about his one laptop per child project, which is, you might have heard of. It's quite a well-known project where they give out battery-powered laptops to children in kind of developing countries of the world, like countries in Africa and the the Far East and in Central and South America, places like that, where children can't naturally get access to good teachers. So they provide the one laptop per child. And this has been a project that's been going on now for at least 10 years. And it just shows that children have the ability to be able to learn on their own. And another friend of mine, you recognize him, Sugata Mitra, who I've worked with several times, and he set up the Hole in the Wall project in India, where he opened computer screens for children in the slum areas, and they went in with a tracker ball and were able to teach themselves using minimally invasive education, as he calls it. He's having an argument at the moment with another well-known educational technology professor on my Facebook site, because I posted a new blog post this morning, and they're having an argument about it at the moment live as I'm talking. I can hear it pinging on my mobile. But so these guys have kind of demonstrated that children have the capacity to be able to learn for themselves using the right technology and the right connections. But the caveat for this is that Sugata Mitra talks about the idea that they learn better when they're in small groups. If they're on their own, they learn, but they don't learn as fast and they don't learn as deeply. Whereas when they're in small groups, maybe 3 or 4 children gathered around the same technology, the same computer, they tend to learn better and faster. And they tend to be able to question easier because they're actually seeing it from 4 or 5 different perspectives. And I think that's also important for us to understand. The dynamics of the small group is quite interesting. And I just want to ask you, one of the things he actually said was, he said he met with the author, Arthur C. Clarke, did Sugata, and he went to Sri Lanka and met Arthur C. Clarke before he passed away, and said to him, what do you think about this project? Do you think that computers will ever replace teachers? And Arthur C. Clarke looked at him and said, any teacher who can be replaced by a computer should be. Which is classic Arthur C. Clarke, and he meant it. I mean, you dig deep into that, and you can understand actually that it's a very silly question, really, because teachers will never be replaced by technology completely. Well, what will happen is what I said today. Robots don't replace people; they replace the robot in the people. In other words, they take the mundane stuff from the kind of the simple stuff that we do time and time again, and we get bored with it, and they make that more efficient. Whereas they leave us, they unleash us to focus more on the creative and the intuitive and the empathetic and the emotional stuff, which they can't do at all. So that's why I believe that computers will never replace teachers, and that's what Arthur C. Clarke was saying. But I think there are 3 more important questions than that we can talk to today. And I've written a blog post on each of them. Thank you for those of you who have been in and read it. And thanks even more to the 1 or 2 of you that have actually been in and made comments so far. I hope that more of you will actually write comments. Here are the 3 questions and the 3 blog URLs for you to look at later on. The first is, what do online educators need? What they need to be able to know and to do to actually become effective online educators. In other words, what do traditional teachers who want to make that leap to online education need to be able to do extra or additional or in a different way? And that's a big, big question. And the other two questions are this one here: how can we engage learners online? The idea that when you engage children in the classroom, you have techniques, you have methods that you use. You've been taught these when you were teacher training, and when you came out of that and you did your first few years in the classroom, you found your way around and you gradually perfected some ideas that where you can try to engage as many young people and children as you can, and keep them on task as long as you can. How do we do that with online learners when they may be separate from you and from everyone else, when they may be studying on their own? How do we do that? And the third big question is, how different is e-assessment from normal assessment? What do we need to think about there? What do we need to actually concern ourselves with? How different is it from traditional education and educational assessment, from finding out what children know and what they need to know next? So these are big questions, I think, for educators. And I wonder if you might just get together for a few minutes and discuss this amongst yourselves. And maybe we'll say 2 or 3 minutes, pick a question that you like, that you think is really challenging, and have a go at discussing it, and come back to me with your solutions or your answers, your responses in a few minutes. Can we do that? Off you go.
And it brings different people rather than just we were just talking with each other. And
Okay, so are we ready to get some feedback going? Yeah. Does anyone want to start? Should we start off in Rotorua? Anyone got any ideas there, or any questions you thought were really interesting to actually pursue, and what your responses might be?
There's one person from each table want to get up, talk about what they're going to do. You might need to get closer to the camera.
I can't quite hear you.
Put a chair there. And if you want to just come up and have a chat with me.
Okay, can't see myself. Hang on.
I can see you.
Right now I can see myself. So our group, we're sort of talking about what it was like around the group dynamics of students, and I guess this related to engaging our learners, and how everything was quite flexible and different at every insight, whether you could have, you know, larger groups of kids like we saw you in your pictures, or the one and onlys coming in from different insights. And I guess the different group dynamics, they had benefits in that students could, if you had a group of students, that they could be motivating, engaging each other, but at the same time they could also be distracting each other because they were not so focused as a single student might be.
Yeah.
So that was sort of really what we talked about in our group.
Good thoughts there. I think several things can come out of that. One is that often children who feel distracted when they're in a traditional school, when they go over to online learning, they become less distracted, which is really interesting. So it does depend on their personality and then their kind of interests and their context. The other thing is that when I used to do distance learning with my own students, I'd be sat in, we had two sites that were 50 miles apart from each other, and I would sit 1 week in one site, another week in another site, and connect the two groups together. And it was interesting because the students who were with me felt that I was focusing more on the remote group, whereas the remote group thought I wasn't paying them enough interest. So, you know, there was this kind of dynamic going on between the two groups that they both felt a little bit peripheralized.
Yeah, I can hear the years going in the background behind me. I think people have experienced that as well too.
Yeah. So that's an interesting psychological phenomenon. So I think the best possible solution is to do what that teacher did, and maybe what I'm doing here is to be remote from everybody. And then maybe you're all in the same boat together. So that you raised some interesting questions there. That's great. And we will get more questions from these questions, guys. You know, this is not, we're looking for some answers tonight, but the questions will raise themselves up from that. Who else is there? Anyone else from Rotorua before we go over to Gisborne, perhaps?
Darren's turn.
So I have to apparently. How are you going, Steve? You good?
Good, mate. Yeah, good.
So we discussed in this group here. We discussed how do we engage learners online, and it's a huge topic. It's a question we've grappled with for many years, and it's something that educators grapple with face to face as well. So we discussed that was the first question we raised, is actually, okay, it's a problem face to face, or a challenge face to face. How's it different online? And there was some really good discussion around the importance of relationships and how you build relationships, and the question of within a face-to-face setting, there's sort of naturally occurring shared experience that happens where you're with kids sort of on a daily basis, a minute-by basis, and you're sharing experience. So the question is, how can you create that sort of shared experience online? So there's an engaging experience for kids because they have this connected experience. They develop relationships with their teacher and with others. So that's sort of where things were going in our discussions. It was really honed in quite early on relationships. However, recognise there's a whole host of questions around engagement, themes that emerged, but it was quite interesting. And to be honest, yeah, with 5 minutes, we could spend 2 hours or more on it. But that's sort of where we sort of went with things.
Again, some really interesting thoughts there, and as you say, there are probably no answers to this. Every situation will be different. You'll have to kind of use your intuition and your experience to try and grapple with these questions. But I can tell you that when I was doing my research thesis many years ago, so about 2004, I think I finished my research degree. One of the questions that I answered or tried to address, should I say, was this very issue of engaging learners online, and I discovered that there are 2 key elements to online engagement. They both revolve around dialogue. The idea that you're actively engaged in discussion, you're actively engaged in doing something where you have to think hard about it, where maybe the learning is in the struggle, maybe the learning is in the the kind of the grappling with the issue that's quite complex, which has no maybe several answers to it. And I discovered the 2 key elements to that would be, one is social presence. In other words, the perception that you are in the same room as that person, even though you're not. That you're sharing the same experience. Back to sharing again, back to being connected again. And the second one was immediacy. In other words, knowing that if you have a question to ask, then someone is there almost immediately to address that. That question might be something that nags at you, and the longer it takes to answer it, the more maybe disconnected you become, more disillusioned. It may be a technical issue, maybe an issue that's academic, it may be an issue that's social or emotional. But to be able to have that question answered or addressed, or at least considered immediately or within a very, very short time, is really important. So those two ideas alone, I think, might give some of you some thoughts about how you can conduct learning online that is engaging. Yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, I think there's probably some more questions that fall on.
Yeah, well, let's carry on. Gisborne, do you want to? I really want to give you a chance. Do you want to come in, anyone there? And I don't know.
Yep, kia ora. Yeah,
Hey, kia ora.
With me teaching Te Reo Māori, my engagement with them is from the start to the end. Opening with kariki and waiata, they love singing, and if I find a student pe whakamā or shy, I would like to talk about their interests and what they really thoroughly enjoy, why they're learning the language, and then it all comes out about the emotion of why they're doing it. Is because they're a New Zealander, they want to be part of what everything is around that All Blacks do the haka. Well, I want to learn how to do that sort of thing, that cultural, that fires the young people up. And I've just been having a great time teaching the students from all different nationalities, especially Pacifica children, our European students as well. That their speaking of the language and pronunciation has just been amazing.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's about finding common ground, something they're interested in, tapping into their passions, isn't it, as much as anything? And I think we can do that much easier when we're kind of point to multi-point. When there are lots of students online and they're all in different parts of the world, they'll be able to engage not just with their own local culture, but sharing that culture with everybody else who may be from a different part of the world, perhaps. So I think we start to see the globalization, then, if you like, of that effect. The internationalization of it, if you like, which I think is a fabulous idea. So thank you for that. That's really fascinating.
Okay, thank you.
So should we go back to Rotorua? You said there were some more questions or responses, perhaps.
Come on, we've got reluctance here, but someone will get up. We're trying to get them engaged.
What engagement going on here, eh?
Derek, what about the chats that have been done too? There's like 20 chats, I think, we looked at some.
Hi, Steve. I'm Ken, and I got pushed up from the table. Our discussion went all over the place, but we started with that first question, and we thought, well, the question perhaps isn't quite right. It should be, what do online learners need? And it's the two questions are actually hand in hand. But we spent a bit of conversation, and I work with Darren, and we quite often are employing sort of teachers to work in this space, or encouraging teachers to work in this space. And for me, it comes back to what you were hinting at before, that we're looking more for personal skills rather than technical skills. It's that empathetic intelligence or emotional intelligence, being able to, being able to sort of connect and or orchestrate connections in what is a more constrained environment than face to face. But we did come to full circle and sort of, you know, good teaching also in face to face needs that sort of to be able to generate that sort of emotional learning community connectedness. It's not so much the technology; it's more of the people connection. So that's where, and we did stray also into the e-assessment and how e-assessment as it is, or assessment as it is a lot more about control, and it could be a lot more powerful if it was to drive where future learning as communities of learners or as individual learning went. Yeah, we're just scratching the surface of the potential of how we could use assessment. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
No, and I think you're right about the idea of emotional intelligence. I mean, Daniel Goleman talks about this a lot in his books. Calls it EQ, emotional quotient, as opposed to IQ. Yeah, and I think it's important that we create emotional connections with our students, whether we're face to face or at a distance, or both. You know, and I think it's important that that we know that is a part of our pedagogy. And you're right to question the question itself. What do online educators and learners need? And that really is the next part that we're going to come to in a minute. The idea that actually we're all in this boat together. And so I'm glad you pointed this out, because we all need things like digital literacies. And I'm not talking about technical skills here so much. I'm not talking about the idea of, you know, how we contemplate things like security online, e-safety, how we contemplate things like the literacies that we need to be able to use technology effectively to communicate with it, to connect together. So I don't want to leave out our colleague down in, where is it? Begins with a C again, I forgot the name of it. Did you want to say anything?
Is it me?
Yeah,
Hi. I was just thinking that for me and my students, the e-assessment is quite an interesting environment, and we've also come across a lot of challenges as far as technical, because with digital technologies, I found that often the schools don't necessarily have the understanding of how to fix a problem, and because I need them to use certain types of software, online environment doesn't always provide what we need, and the school, you can't control what the schools have available. But as far as engaging the students go, I use a lot of humor. Yeah. We just use a lot of humor, and like I find now that if the students sometimes get online even before I do, and they're having a bit of a joke around, you know, to break the ice, which is really nice. Whereas, you know, when they first started, they'd all just sit there and stare at me and, you know, wait for the teacher to say everything. And they, you know, once you sort of break the ice with a bit of humor, they start to build some connections, which is really nice.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, it's back to emotional intelligence, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Back to connecting through common ground. You know, you too, I felt that. I thought I was the only one, you know, type of thing, you know. All I do about that, you know, is quite brilliant. I used to use wikis a lot with my students in the early days, back in around about 2007, 2006. We started using wikis to connect small groups together, and to give them a common place to meet and to collaborate, which I think was important. And they felt included because each of them was given a separate task to begin with. So the first task that they were given was to actually introduce themselves by posting up a summary of who they were and maybe a picture that represented them. It didn't have to be them, it could be a cat or a plant or anything, you know, but it was a picture that represented them, something personal. And once they self-disclosed that bit, the next task was to go out and find a resource that they thought would be useful for the whole group to use. So they had to go out and, you know, like we call it gold mining, and they go out and find a nugget of gold somewhere and bring it back and present it on the wiki so that everybody could enjoy it, maybe learn from it. And then the next step was to take it farther and to start, you know, annotating it and to you know, and for other people to come in and start annotating and for them to start collaboratively writing. And by then the ice has been broken. So, I mean, sometimes you have to do it slowly. Sometimes you have to do it with humor. Sometimes you have to do it with common ground, shared cultures. There's a whole range of things that we can bring to our armory to actually use to engage learners. So thank you for that. That's fabulous. And are there any other comments from anybody before we move on? I'm conscious that we're running out of time. I don't know how much time we've got left, Darren.
I'll take as much time as
okay.
Just recognising there's actually quite a vibrant chat going on, so keep that going and feel free to participate. There's a really interesting comment that came. Oh, Philippa, you want to say something?
Oh, well, I was just turning my faceless self off and was going to say the same thing, that if anybody wants to look at the chat, if you just open the chat screen, there's quite a lot going on there. And interestingly, a lot of what we said you then repeated, Steve, which is amusing and great. So.
And by the same token, if you do feel the need to go into these websites and have a look at my elaboration on this, and maybe some links that I've shared with you, then please do go into those URLs and even comment. I will promise I will get back to you and respond to your comments. Whatever you decide that you want to share or say or question or criticize, that's great, because that all adds to the fuel to the fire of our discussion. Really, we want to build a fire, not a, don't we really, and let it erupt really, rather than fill a pail with water. So please feel free to contribute in any way you want to, either online or through the discussion groups here on those URLs. That's why I wrote them. I said to Darren I would write these for you to begin with. Excuse me. Dry throat here. I'm starting to talk too much, I think.
Yeah, there was a really interesting commenter in the chat around shy kids, shy students. That's where often the technology is not a barrier, it's an opportunity in a way. Like certainly within the video conference environment, that can be quite a daunting environment for shy kids. But the asynchronous, the social media type environments, often it's where they find their voice, because it's far less daunting. They have time to think about what they're going to do. I find quite often in those environments, the shy kids really fly, because there's not the scary aspect there.
It's been proven time and again that people who are fairly introvert in their personality, if there is such a thing, then they change that character when they go online, because they have almost like they're once removed from the experience, and they're being mediated through the technology, and therefore it's not really them. They change their persona slightly. That's interesting in itself from a psychological perspective, but we can play that to our advantage as educators, definitely. Okay, shall we move on a little bit? And I've got just a few more things to show you to get your head going a bit more around this, and then maybe you can continue the discussion if you want to. I don't want to stifle your discussion or your collaboration at all, but I just thought I'd show you this. I often show my own students as I say, what's wrong with it? And I swear this is true. One of my students once said to me, "Oh, is it 70%?" I said, look again. And she went, oh, for goodness sake, and she realized who it was. And so what I said before, we need digital literacies. There's so much rubbish out there online. There's so much misleading information and so much fake news and deep fakes, as we call them now. They've risen by 80% in the last 6 months, apparently, deep fake videos. So there's a lot of stuff out there that we have to wade through. There was a program yesterday on BBC television over here in the UK about Wikipedia and the seeming kind of Wikipedia wars that are going on, editorial wars going on between the Chinese state and the state of Taiwan over, who's right, who has the right of the territory. And it's happening actually on the web pages. You get 80 or 90 or 100 edits a day going both ways, this kind of editorial war going on. So that we need to understand this more. We need to be able to gain a purchase on these ideas, and that goes for learners as well, learners and educators. We need to be able to understand more about this alien world that we're in, that we call the digital. And so I try to explain digital literacies this way. Everybody's got skills. So I learned to drive in the UK. You probably learned to drive in New Zealand. So you drive on the left-hand side of the road, don't you? So do I. And you drive on the right-hand side of the car, yeah? And you probably have a highway code that you follow, a set of rules that kind of help you to maintain safety on the road and courtesy to other drivers and so on. So we learn these things, and we struggle at first. You drive over the curb and you go through the red lights and you stall the car, but eventually you become fairly competent with it. Probably competent to the extent that you probably drive to work every morning and don't even know you've driven to work. You don't remember it because it's unconscious competence. All right, but that's fine until you go to somewhere like America or China or somewhere else where you're driving on the other side of the road and the other side of the car, and all the road signs are different and maybe the language is different as well. And I did that in America. I had struggled for some time. The car didn't even have a gear shift. It was automatic, and I'd never driven one of those before either. So it took me a while to adjust, and my competency was worthless for a while until I learnt the cultural relevance of learning how to drive in America. And then it became a literacy. And eventually, ultimately, of course, you can become fluent in that area. And I put it to you that actually that's what we do in digital environments. We learn the ropes by watching other people and being told certain things. I mean, for instance, who knew that writing in uppercase was actually shouting? But we all found that out, didn't we? It's a cultural literacy in the digital world. There are loads of them. Emoticons, using emoticons to express yourself when you don't want people to confuse your kind of your irony with real kind of sarcasm. Yeah, so we have these devices that we use, which we learn, which become our literacies, if you will. And so digital literacy really doesn't replace the 4 R's, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It gives us 4 C's to add to those 3 R's, if you like. It's a supplement. And Mark Federman talks about connection, the ability to be able to connect, and then the ability to be able to interpret contexts effectively, and then the ability to be able to wade through the complexities and see the simplicity. And finally, the ability to make meaning out of those complexities. So those 4 C's there, I think, are part of the digital literacies that we need, all of us, learners and teachers. And as I said, we're all in this together, so I mean, we can teach each other this. My students teach me all the time. They're always teaching me new stuff because I'm not as literate as them in some areas, although I'm supposed to be a learning technology specialist. I can tell them anything they like about the theory behind it, but when it comes to the practice, sometimes they're a lot more adept than I am. And I've got to be humble enough to say, okay, you can teach me just like I can teach you. Let's do this together. And so today's learners, according to John Waters, who did a lot of research into this over the last decade, they tend to be more self-directed. They tend to be wanting to collaborate more. But here's the big one at the bottom here. I mentioned this already. They tend to be more oriented towards sharing and performing their learning with each other. They take selfies. And Elsies as well, of course. You know what an Elsie is? It's when someone else takes the selfie for you. It's an Elsie. And all of this kind of stuff's going on all the time. Citizen journalism going on. Taking videos of themselves, making vlogs and blogs and podcasts and so on, and sharing them with an audience out there that is huge. I have a friend called David Mitchell, who's an ex-head teacher. He now makes his living going around the world, with something called quad blogging. Has anyone heard of it? Quad blogging. Have a look at it. You've heard of it down there. Yeah, Philip has heard of it. Quad blogging is amazing because what you do is you get 4 schools together anywhere in the world and you connect them via a blog tool. And in the first week, one of the schools agrees for all the children to blog. They write short stories. The other 3 schools agree for their children to read and comment on those short stories. Second week, it changes to another school and so on until by the end of the month, every school has written, read and commented. And the children learn new writing literacies, but not just that. Because they're writing for an audience of more than one, because they're writing for an audience that could be huge potentially, it opens up to the whole world, they tend to raise their game. They tend to concentrate more on what they're writing, on the creative aspects of it, the grammatical structures, the syntax they use, even things like, sourcing uncopyrighted or non-copyrighted content to share, so they're not breaking the law. All of this kind of stuff is really fabulous, rich literacy for the digital age. So we need to think about how we can operationalize this kind of stuff within our schools. Whether the children are face-to-face or remote, it doesn't matter. They can still do these things. They can still perform their learning. And here's one theory which I really like. It comes from Cornelian Danoff. It was first published around about 2010, I think, or 2009. But the idea of pedagogy is that instead of having a learner and a knowledgeable other person, which is up here, and kind of transmitting knowledge and helping them to scaffold their learning. What you've got is almost like an equalization between 2 peers, or more than 1 peer in a group, where everyone knows something, but nobody knows everything. And they agree that that's the case. And then they all learn from each other. They all teach each other. So in effect, it's a kind of a peer production of learning. And I think that's quite interesting because that tends to level the playing field for teachers and their students as well. Goes back to the fact that they can teach me as much as I can teach them. So in effect, it's not so much a theory, it's more a state of mind, an acceptance that we can all learn from each other. And another theory is this one here, which is Sams and Bergman. You've probably heard of it, the idea of flip classrooms, yeah? Now, flip classrooms is not a new idea. But what they're doing now is they're taking the technology and they're taking stuff which is really difficult to do, like assimilation of ideas, and they're flipping it around with delivery of ideas, which is simple. So the delivery of the idea gets done through video or through some other medium away from the classroom. And then once the students have learnt that sufficiently enough, they can come into the classroom and assimilate it critically with an expert present in the room with them. That's the idea behind it. But I go farther than that, and I say, let's flip the teacher as well. If I'd have said that when I was at school, I'd have got into trouble. But flipping the teacher for me means exchanging the roles. So in effect, when I stand in front of my students, I say to them, okay, not only am I going to learn from you, but you're going to teach me. You're going to go away and you're going to learn this theory or this idea, and you're going to come back, you're going to learn it so thoroughly that you're going to learn something, that I'm going to learn something new from you when you present it to me. They go, is that possible? And of course, often it is, because they'll find a nuance or an idea that I haven't found myself. So even I may be a professor, but for them, they can still teach me things, and that really motivates them to go off and learn deeply. And then I become their awkward student. And I start asking them the awkward questions, and I start pushing them and say, okay, yeah, you say that, but, or where's your evidence for this? Or how do you know? And in a way, it challenges the idea of knowledge being, kind of, up there somewhere, and you have to try and grasp it. You can bring the knowledge down to you and then build upon it through discussion and through argument and so on. So there's another way of engaging students. Because we learn by teaching, you see. Descenderdicimus, I think, is the Latin term. Descenderdicimus, we learn by teaching. If you're going to teach something, or if you're going to present something, you're going to have to learn it fairly well first and know it fairly well inside out before you can present it with confidence. So these are all kind of ideas. The idea of self-organized learning, pedagogy, as we call it. The idea of, I think, also Sugata Mitra's idea of self-organized learning environments comes into play here, where students can go away and they can use these tools to organize their own learning, and you intervene when it's necessary. and you give them the license to go away and maybe organize some of their learning themselves. Self-organized learning environments that I mentioned before, it's fascinating to see how students do self-organize when you give them the space. I've got a whole group of students at the moment who are doing a program with me at the new university I'm teaching at now, which I've only been teaching at for the last 2 months. And I said to them, look, go away and organize your own space. And so they went off and they created their own WhatsApp group. In fact, they created 2. They created one for me with them and one without me in it, for obvious reasons. You can imagine why. Because sometimes they want to let off steam and they don't want me to see that. So they've got the one with me is called the one with Steve, just so that nobody makes a mistake of posting the wrong content, which I think is very, very sweet. But then there's also the idea of rhizomes, the idea of underground connections between all the plant roots. You pull up a weed and you think it's gone, but then it pops up somewhere else because it's all connected under the ground. And this is the same idea that we have on the web, I think, today. That everything's connected together, and you can follow various pathways through it on your own and eventually come up with the same result or a similar result, but you've learned so much more by going out on your own and discovering it for yourself than you would if you were directed to do it. So these are all ideas I'm throwing at you now. Follow Dave Cormier's work if you want to look at this in more detail. And MOOCs, of course, we've heard about massive online open courses. There's the CMOOCs, which were very, very interesting. I was involved in the first one way back in 2005, I think it was, with Stephen Downes and George Siemens, when I was in Ireland, I believe, speaking to students all over the world. And at the time, you could choose your own assessment modes as well, which was fascinating. You would create your own projects, and you could learn in any way you wanted to, at any time, at any place you wanted to, along with all the other students. But you all went your own ways and then came back for plenary meetings where you discuss each other's work. The XMOOCs, I think, more recently have become more commercialized. Coursera and edX and all the other commercial companies have now taken it over, and it's very much back to traditional kind of methods of online learning now. So you've got to be careful with MOOCs, but you can embed them. You can embed aspects of them into a course and send the students off for maybe a week to work through a MOOC and then come back and report what they've learned. So there's lots of ways of using MOOCs. Supplemental or self-blended learning, we call it, I think, these days. And just a quote from Woodrow Wilson, who was president of the US in the First World War, I believe. I not only use all the brains I have, but all that I can borrow as well. And that should also give us a clue about, as educators, how we should create our communities of practice and then engage with our communities of practice, maybe through social media or through our interest groups or through professional associations. And I'm sure all of you have got your own personal learning networks and professional learning networks which you engage with. If you haven't, I can point you in the right direction of teachers around the world who'd love to share their ideas with you and would love to hear your ideas too. So storing your knowledge with your friends, that for me is connectivism. That's the new theory that's emerging, where we talk about, it's not so much sharing having your knowledge inside your head, it's knowing where to get that knowledge when you need it to put it inside your head. So you don't have to learn everything anymore, you just have to know where to find it. So back to digital literacies again. And paragogy I mentioned earlier on, and hertagogy I mentioned earlier on. So these 3 ideas probably are the new theories for the digital age of learning. They're the 3 new educational theories that do not replace the old theories, but they do actually build onto them again, just like we do with technology. And so we can crowdsource our learning these days as well. And I think you'll find students are doing this more and more. They might start with the content that you provide them. So the amount of preparation you do is proportional to the amount of engagement that they're going to have with that content, but they'll go off and they'll supplement that content. I remember students in the room when I was in the room with them, and they'd be on their laptops and I'd be saying, what are you doing? They're just checking what you've said and then going farther with it, drilling down. And they're finding more information. They're finding hyperlinks which elaborate on what I said. Because there's only so much I can say or present in the time available. But then they can go off, if they're fascinated by it, which they should be, which you should make it fascinating, they'll go off and they'll drill down for themselves. And they'll build their own learning networks based on that. So really, like Stephen Johnson said, it's not about the wisdom of the crowd anymore. It's about the wisdom of people in the crowd and how they share that. Hence the idea of connected pedagogy. So I hope you now kind of got the idea of what I mean by connected pedagogy and how it can be capitalized on, harnessed through those technologies, through the mediation of those technologies and the connection of communities of learning. And it's up to you now, I think, to go away and discuss what you think connected pedagogy means for you, and whether you think it can be applied in different ways, in different contexts, according to the way you teach, your teacher beliefs, the way you practice your education, and the way you connect with your students. So I hope that's been interesting for you. I've gone a bit over time, but hopefully it's not been too onerous for you. And there's all my connections, my details for you to connect with me. And please feel free to email me or to tweet me. I'm on Twitter. There's my blog there as well, and my professional website for you to go and have a look at and ask more questions if you need to. So thank you very much. And I hope that's been okay for you.
Thanks so much. Oh, we're just good to see you. Thanks so much, Steve. Actually, I mean, I was sitting there and I'm sure everyone else is, and I'm really looking forward to digging into those questions, because basically a whole load of other questions fall out of it, but also opportunities and ideas and things. And what we're going to do is use the collective wisdom in this group here and actually start to really dig into those and see where they lead us. So you've actually really set up the day fantastically well. We greatly appreciate it. Also, I think it's important that if you're willing, if there's any questions, would anyone like to ask any questions of Steve, or comments around some of the ideas he was sharing?
Fire away.
Do you have a link that you talk about international online network of teachers?
Yeah, there's several. If you go onto Twitter and look for the hashtags, there's EdChat, which is one, EDCHAT, EdChat. So put the hashtag in front of it, and then EdChat, and then just search for that on the top of Twitter there, you know, with the magnifying glass, and you'll find the EdChat, which is an international discussion group by teachers from all over the world. Then there's Eden Chat, which is one that I set up, EDEN Chat, Eden Chat. That's the European Distance Education Network, and I was the chair of that for 3 years until a couple of years ago when I stood down. But I set Eden Chat up for people to discuss various themes and topics around online learning and distance education. So if you want specifics on that, that's another worldwide body of discussion. And all you do is you click onto that and follow the discussion. You can contribute yourself if you like, or just lurk if you want to, if you don't feel confident enough. But what you can do is look at the people who are taking part and then follow them. And they'll probably follow you back anyway, because they're that kind of, you know, group of people. They're open to meeting as many people as they can and learning as much as they can. So you just follow people and by clicking on and just clicking the follow button, and pretty soon you've got yourself a kind of a regular global 24-hour news feed of ideas coming at you all the time, which you've self-selected. And for me, that is the most amazing thing about social media, is you can create your own professional community of practice.
Thanks for that. Other questions or comments? I have one I'm going to ask, but if you have anyone online, just feel free just to go off mute and ask a question or make a comment.
And please comment on the blog if you can. You know, if you've got questions, or if you've got, you know, discussion points you want to, you know, please do, and I'll come back. And as I said, there's 1 or 2 people who have already commented on it, hopefully from your group. Maybe not, I don't know, because they were anonymous. But really salient points were coming up, really relevant points, thoughtful, you know, comments, and I think that's just the start of a brilliant conversation if we can carry on having it.
Can I just ask you a rather large, complex question? That won't have an answer necessarily, but considering the changes that technology is currently sort of bringing into society and world work and etc., and some of the ideas we're considering here, what do you think are the implications for formal schooling over the next 20, 30 years?
I didn't quite hear that last bit, Darren, the last sentence.
What what do you think are the implications for
Implications, right.
education over the next 20, 30 years?
Right. Well, I think this is a complex question, and I'd be kind of crystal ball gazing and trying to make prophecies and predictions that may or may not come true. I deliberately kept away from all the future and emerging technologies, you know, things like AR and AI and VR and so on, which I tend to present at conferences where people are interested in the technology. I deliberately kept away from those today, but they are on the horizon, and they will make a huge impact, I think, in the future of education. I don't think they will replace teachers. I mentioned before, our jobs are safe because we do things that computers can't do, and I don't think we'll ever be able to do. The intuitive, the creative, the emotional, empathetic kind of connections that we make, which computers cannot even model, let alone mimic. I'm constantly looking at the developments of artificial intelligence, and I can see things happening which are rather interesting, but they're very, very niche and very specialized. And until they get to the point where they can create algorithms that can actually really learn for themselves instead of just following instructions, we'll not see it going too far. I always said that the difference between and the advantage that a human has over a computer is that a human can break rules. Think about it. And we're always breaking rules, aren't we, as teachers? We're always kind of bending things and subverting things to actually make things work for us. Computers can't do that unless they're programmed to, and then all they're doing is following instructions. So again, they're not really breaking the rules. There are lots of implications for students. I think students will expect a lot more. They'll expect us to use technology more because they're immersed in it. It's like the goldfish in the bowl. You can see the water around it, but it can't. It doesn't know it's there because it's natural to it. And I think a lot of our young people today are like that. They're naturally kind of blissfully unaware of the technology around them because they're using it all the time. And for them, it's transparent. They can see right through it into the learning. We struggle with it. You know, I struggle with my mobile phone even today, you know, and I'm doing this kind of stuff, you know, with one finger, whereas my children, they're using one thumb, you know, and they're doing it rapidly, and they're not even looking. So, you know, for me, my digital literacies aren't as strong as theirs in some areas. So I think we need to understand that children and young people have quite an adeptness. Not all of them, it's not general, but a lot of them do. So they'll expect more technology. Don't expect or don't think that you'll impress them with technology. You won't. It might be awesome to you and magical to you, but for them it's just run of the mill. So don't even try. And other implications, you know, don't become dad at the disco. Don't try and enter into their web spaces and try and speak their language, because you won't be able to. They've got a culture that's emerging all of their own. Try and understand it if you can, but don't try and participate unless they invite you to. It's like the WhatsApp group, isn't it, really? You know, the one with Steve and the one without Steve. So there's lots of implications. I could talk all day about this, really, but you know, that would be boring. I write about it instead. I brought out several books on this subject, so seek them out. Another book that I was going to recommend you have a look at, actually, is this one. Which I mentioned Sugata Mitra earlier on. I've written one of the endorsements inside this book. It's called School in the Cloud. And for me, that is his definitive volume. He's taken all of his life to bring out one single book. He's never written a book before that I know of. But suddenly he's brought this book out just as on the point when he's retired. And it documents everything he's done in the last, 20 odd years using technology in education. And it's a fabulous read. So I'd recommend that one definitely to you.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Steve. I'll come there now. Are there any questions, comments?
Did you say that you talk about future technology in some different situations?
Yeah.
When would those situations be? Because I'd be interested.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's my area. I'm the digital tech person.
We should connect. I've been saddled with this kind of title of futurist. I'm not a futurist, really. I'm not like some of the guys that I work with, people like Brian Alexander and Gerd Leonard. You probably know these guys. they're both old friends of mine, but they go into it in much more depth than I do. I'm more interested in the pedagogy behind these new and emerging technologies, but there are lots of different contexts. So for instance, right at the moment, I'm about to be involved in a project with the Royal Navy in the UK here, which is kind of, it's a very, very expensive project. There's billions of pounds involved in it over the next 10, 15 years. And what they're looking at is simulation training using augmented and virtual reality. And those tools are incredible, really, because we're still on the edge of that. We're still very, very embryonic with those tools. But already we can do some amazing things with them. So, for instance, you know, let's consider we need to train up 400 submariners, you know, to go onto the new nuclear submarines, and the base is about 4 miles away, just across the river here where I live. So we need to train these sailors to go on these nuclear submarines. They're all exactly the same inside, but the thing is, we can't afford to train them all at the same time because we haven't got the submarines in port. So what we do is we create a virtual simulation of all of that, and using their visors and wands and so on. Maybe the Vive system. You know, you've heard of Vive, or maybe another tool, one of Microsoft's tools, perhaps. You actually create an environment where they can go around and explore the whole of the internal structure of the nuclear class submarine. And eventually when they come to go onto that submarine for the first time, there's no orientation required.
That's cool.
Yeah. And we've been doing that for the last 10 years. Not Plymouth University. So that's one concept for you. Can you see how that could be applied in education across the board? Science, you know, geography, history, you know, there's incredible the scope that we're on the verge of realizing when you start to employ those technologies for real in the classroom.
That's the kind of thing I'm keen on looking at, but unfortunately some of it takes money.
Yeah. Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
There's a company in New Zealand who's actually working with the Ministry of Social Development, and they are making these games here in New Zealand. So currently they've got for forklift driving, I think, and crane operation. It's JBA, Joy Business Academy, really big contracts that they're using VR for education and developing all the software here. It's huge. So I don't think it'd be that long before it's going to be in classroom spaces as well. The one thing that they're struggling with, though, is seasickness, for want of a better description. And it is really bad, and they're trying to, deal with that because the guys doing I think it's the crane one is the worst or something. They're getting really sick really quickly. But the other thing is that what they're doing is that somebody can put on the headset in Auckland, for example, and train with another operator who is anywhere else in the world or anywhere else, who's got a visor. So it's hugely powerful. And like I said, all New Zealand-based people and technology.
Well, it never ceases to amaze me what's happening in New Zealand, because every time I go across there and come across and meet your colleagues, I'm always learning new things. It always seems to be advanced there. I was at Unitech about 10 years ago. Do you know Unitech in Auckland? Anyone know it? They've got a construction site there. Do you know it? And they train builders, construction workers, people, carpenters and plumbers and electricians and so on. And they've got kind of it's a live building site there with buildings in all states of completion. And I noticed 10 years ago, I noticed this, that they had QR tags on the walls all over the place. And all the student had to do was walk up to it with his mobile phone, click on it, and the QR tag would take them to the website, which showed them how to render a plaster or how to wire a building up or whatever. And then they'd get on and learn at their own pace, and the tutors would come around and check on their work. And for me, then that was really futuristic. Now it's commonplace, but they were one of the first people to do it. So, you're always quite well ahead over there.
Anyone else? Okay, I think we're due for a break here, but thanks very much for your time, Steve. I greatly appreciate it, and we hope to continue the discussion online and feel free to participate. And thanks for everyone else who's come along online. I really appreciate this, some fantastic chat that's come along there. And this is a recorded session, so we will put the video up. And yeah, we'd love to have the slides at some point, Steve, and we'll share all that.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
I'll send them to you.
no, and I think probably it's quite late there now, so I mean, it might be preparing for bedtime, I suppose.
It's 11 o'clock here almost, so yeah, well past my bedtime. My cocoa's gone cold.
You've done really well then, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for that, and thanks for everyone else, and yeah, we will see you again soon, and sort of connect online.
Great.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.
You.